It's Wednesday, January 18th, 2017, and this is KBIA's Views of the News. Our weekly roundtable on media behaviors comes to you from the Futures Lab studio at the Reynolds Journalism Institute. I'm Amy Simons, and here with me are my colleagues Mike McKean and John Fennell. On our program this week, the ice storm that wasn't. We'll talk about how the Mid-Missouri news media covered this weekend's weather event, and I'll ask Mike and John if they thought it was overblown. Morning TV turns 65. Last week marked another milestone anniversary for NBC's Today Show. We'll talk about the influence that program has had on how America wakes up each day. And Facebook's move to change how it handles fake news ahead of elections in Germany. There's a lot more that hopefully we'll get to as well. But first, let's talk about this week's big news here at home, Friday's inauguration of President-elect Donald Trump. The world will be watching as he takes the oath of office and then watching to see what happens afterward. Among the big issues that we are going to be keeping an eye on, the ongoing relationship the Trump White House has with journalists. The New York Times announced yesterday that it is earmarking $5 million just to cover the new president. So let me start by asking each of you, does that sound like a little or a lot?
I don't know. I mean, you have to spend more and more on security all the time. I heard a piece on NPR this morning. They were talking about having to put special attention on somebody driving a huge truck into the crowds there. And we all know that that has happened in a couple of places already. So every time you think you've got the security situation figured out, they have to add a new layer to it. So wouldn't surprise me if they had to spend that much money on it.
Yeah, I totally agree. When you think about $5 million, you think about they have 6 dedicated reporters to Trump. Plus what they've done before, and considering this kind of worldwide influence that Trump has had, and the reporting may indicate, I think they may be even spending more.
Okay. Washington Post columnist Margaret Sullivan has written a column that's been making the rounds this week that's saying journalists are about to be in for the fight of their lives. This is going to be a challenge like we have never seen before.
Well, and in fact, she didn't write these words, but the headline writer for the piece put a hellscape of lies and distorted reality awaits journalists. So that wasn't BuzzFeed, that wasn't the Huffington Post, that was the Washington Post. So I think that a lot of journalists are a little more than a little concerned about the relationship with the president-elect.
I was very impressed with Jim Rutenberg of the New York Times when he talked about we just have to do our jobs. And I think that Eric Weppel of the Washington Post said it best, reporting. And I think that's really where it lies right now, that journalists have to just keep their nose to the ground and just do the reporting. Whether in the White House, whether in the executive office building, it's just reporting.
So let's talk about that for a second, because there is word this week that perhaps the White House briefing room, that perhaps the workspace may physically be moved out of the White House itself. Does that matter?
I don't suppose it really matters in the long run. In fact, journalists were moved there for a while under George Herbert Walker Bush when they were remodeling the press room or whatever. So the public probably doesn't care that much. And there are a lot more journalists that want to cover the White House now that Donald Trump's been elected president. But I suspect that the talk about moving it is really a form of another psychological warfare operation against the media.
Politico was reporting this morning, though, that Trump has kind of backed away from the daily news reporting. I mean, the daily news briefing is going to continue happening in the White House. We'll see what happens afterwards. I think, though, that one of the things that this issue about reporting, if obviously it's easier when you're in the White House, you have
physical
access.
Proximity helps.
It totally helps, and I think that was proved during the Bush era, where reporters really got to complain. However, reporting is reporting. If you can't get somebody for a quick soundbite at the newsroom, maybe you'll be more thoughtful about your reporting. Maybe you'll be a little bit more in depth because you can't get that access. So you have to think a little bit more about what is the news and what do we have to report.
I mean, I think all of that is so true, but I do think the news media also have this new burden of just how aggressively do you push back on the outright attacks on the press. I mean, you can't just let it roll, or at least I think some people think you can't just let it roll off your shoulders, because the legitimacy of the news media itself is being challenged on an almost daily basis by the incoming Trump administration. You have to do something. But what does that look like? You still have to respect the dignity of the office of the presidency. And I think the public might appreciate the media, some members of the public might appreciate the media standing up for themselves, but it'd be very easy to go too far.
So with the inauguration coming Friday, I mean, we're taping this at, 1:15, 1:30 in the afternoon to air this evening at 6:30. So that means we're less than 48 hours away. In the next 48 hours, what storylines do you want to see emerge? What may look different than past inaugurations?
I think we can expect the same kind of coverage. The speculation on what his inauguration speech really means and, looking ahead and how people will think about it. But of course, we're going to get all the pomp. We're going to get all the fashion. We're going to get all of the stuff that we normally get. But I certainly want to see more.
To a certain extent, that kind of traditional coverage, it might be a nice little break for everybody, just to see the pomp and circumstance of it and what his speech is going to be like.
Which NPR has said it's going to annotate throughout the speech and fact check in real time.
I thought that was brilliant. Yeah. Actually, I thought it was great.
I'm actually, leading up to this, I'm actually interested in coverage of some other things. I mean, President Obama has done taken more than his share of action in the past few days, including yesterday. Basically, he commuted the sentence of Chelsea Manning.
Right.
It's led to speculation about Edward Snowden. I don't see that happening, but he still has promised to do more pardons and more commutations in the next day or so.
And actually, he's talking about in his final press conference, looking at the media. There was just announced today, I think, on Political Again, that he is really going to address the situation about the media and about Trump and how he views it, even though he's been controversial about how he's handled the media.
And if you want to talk about presidential news the next couple of days, couldn't hurt to do a few more nice profiles and let us know how George Herbert Walker Bush and Barbara Bush are doing. They're both in the hospital right now. Most people would say, whether you agreed or disagreed with his policies, he brought a different temperament to the White House, and maybe reflecting on that.
Don't we look with nostalgia back at those days?
A different Republican president. Trump surrogate Rudy Giuliani went on Sean Hannity's show to talk a little bit about what he's expecting. Take a listen.
He knows exactly what he wants to accomplish. He cannot be intimidated. He's an honest man, so they're not going to catch him in some kind of lie or something like that. And he's got the courage to fight him back. Yeah. And the American people have caught on to it. Yeah. The American people have now caught on to it. So I think that this is going to be very helpful. I think maybe he may actually reestablish journalistic ethics.
Reestablish journalistic ethics. That was Thursday, the day after Trump's news conference, and 2 days after BuzzFeed published a document with the unsubstantiated reports that the Russians were holding on to incriminating evidence of alleged deviant sexual activity. At the time that we are again taping this program, those documents still have not yet been substantiated, but BuzzFeed's management is standing by the decision to publish them.
Well, I guess they have to now. They did make a big mistake. I think they violated journalistic principles that most journalists would uphold. None of those reports, those allegations in that report have been verified. And I think that the journalists who've had access to that document for months now and decided not to release it yet were the ones who made the right decision.
I totally agree. One of the things I think that we have to look at is BuzzFeed. What kind of organization is it? Like Facebook, these are vehicles for information as opposed to publishers in a way. And so they are holding themselves to different standards, Facebook and BuzzFeed, because they're just disseminating information rather than creating it. But I think BuzzFeed was totally wrong in doing it, unlike CNN, which had a legitimate report.
Right. CNN broke the story, albeit in a much more reserved way. Their story centered on three main facts: the existence of the document that showed that there was this intelligence, that the Russians had compromising information. But they had information on both Democrats and Republicans, choosing only to release the damaging materials that would hurt Clinton and the Democrats. They also had reported that there had been an intelligence briefing given to both Trump and President Barack Obama about the contents, but CNN's more measured report was lumped in with BuzzFeed's decision to publish the raw documents, and it was a situation that was quickly conflated during Trump's news conference. Let's listen to what happened when CNN White House correspondent Jim Acosta tried to ask a question.
Sir, since you're attacking us, can you give us a question? Mr. President-elect. Mr. President-elect, since you are attacking our news organization, can you give us a chance? You are attacking our news organization. Can you give us a chance to ask a question, sir?
Go ahead.
Sir, can you state, Mr. President-elect, can you state categorically, Mr. President-elect, can you give us a question? You're attacking us. Can you give us a question?
Don't be rude.
Can you give us a question?
I'm not going to give you a question.
Can you state categorically?
You are fake news.
Sir,
go ahead.
Can you state categorically that nobody... No, Mr. President-elect, that's not appropriate.
So CNN immediately issued a statement standing behind its reporting and Jim Acosta's right to ask the question and push back on the president-elect. How did he end up becoming the target here?
What an embarrassment, I think, not for the news media, but for the country. To see this narcissist, to see this brutish behavior by an incoming president, I think Acosta was right, in fighting back. I think this is what Margaret Sullivan was talking about in her Washington Post. This is a different era. And I think that the news media is really going to have to use every tactic it can to be able to justify what it's trying to do.
I mean, he was the target because he was the CNN reporter in the room, and he dared to try to ask a question when it was made clear that CNN wasn't going to get a question. What was his behavior appropriate? I'd say on balance it definitely was. Yeah. Was he being disrespectful of the office of the president-elect? I don't even know exactly what that means, but he gave as much as he could and still tried to be respectful to Trump himself. And I just think he had to stand up for his news organization. And frankly, I think CNN had to and did do a good job of standing up for itself. They spent many, many minutes after that news conference, Jake Tapper and others, basically saying that here's what our reporting was. Here's why our reporting was accurate. Here's why it is not part of what BuzzFeed did.
Here's why it was really news.
Yeah. And if you look at that, I mean, who was reporting the story? Acosta didn't even have a byline on that story. It was Jake Tapper, one of the best one of the best journalists in the country, Evan Perez, their White House reporter, Jim Scudo, who is their national security reporter, and somebody you might have heard of called Carl
Bernstein. Right.
They sourced that story.
He's not new.
Right.
They never did release any of the information in detail that was in the report. So they walked up to the line. They knew where the line was. They did their job.
Yes, I totally agree.
So one of the things, too, that was interesting about this is how we've seen other journalists also rallying around Jim Acosta, including Shepard Smith at Fox News Channel, coming right out and saying there was nothing wrong here. This is not how it should have gone down, almost speaking to a lot of the electorate, a lot of the constituency in the Trump camp, saying, hey, that's not cool. That's not acceptable.
I kept imagining after watching this whole thing that to defend news, to defend reporting, that if every reporter would have turned around and walked out of that newsroom, it would have really sent a message, I think, to everybody.
Or something else that I saw somebody else suggest on Facebook or something somewhere else that I saw somebody say, what should happen in the next briefing is that everybody should defer their opportunity to ask a question to Jim Acosta. And that nobody except Jim Acosta should agree to even ask a question.
What I think will also be interesting is when the first actual White House news conference from President Trump occurs, it's not going to occur in Trump Tower in front of the Bank of Elevators with hundreds of Trump supporters and staff members cheering and jeering to try to, show support for whatever his talking points are. He's going to be there one-on-one, basically, with reporters. We'll see how that goes. He's very, very good at manipulating the media. He's very good at getting his narrative out there, but that's a different environment.
Talking about getting the media out there, I want to touch for a second on the claim that what CNN was putting out there was fake news. This wasn't fake news. This was news he didn't like. And let's talk for a second about how confusing those two to the audience watching or listening or reading at home really is another level of master manipulation.
I totally agree here in fact but I think what we need to think about is what is fake news. That whole definition, I think we're using it, and Trump is using it against the media at this point. And so having a definition of really what it means is really in order right now, especially in light of what we're going to be seeing with Facebook.
I mean, I can't think of a better phrase. I hear some people, Margaret Sullivan, with the Washington Post has suggested we need to find another phrase because this one's been turned against us. It basically means, whatever it is that I don't want to see reported, that I disagree with is being reported, that to some people is fake news. I don't know what you can do about that. I do think that we have to say that CNN's reporting and the reporting of the other news organizations who talked about the intelligence briefings to the president, that is legitimate, not fake news. On the other hand, I can see how it would be possible for journalists to get that into their news cycle in other ways. Here's an example. On Saturday Night Live decides to do a skit about that report, and I won't tell you what was in that skit. You can check it out, but they took some of the most salacious, allegations in that report and made fun of it. And then guess what? The New York Times and CNN and the Washington Post and everybody else reported on what Saturday Night Live did. I think we could show a little restraint even when it comes to what the comedians are saying about something that we've already decided is not worthy of reporting on.
Okay, well, ironically enough, as we talk about what's going on with Facebook, it says that it's going to filter fake news ahead of the elections in Germany, where it seems Chancellor Angela Merkel is already being targeted with false and misleading content that's circulating rapidly on the social platform. The flagging tools have been unveiled in the past month or so here in the United States, and Facebook says it's also going to team up with a third-party fact checker. I don't know. There was the Brexit over the summer. There was our election here in the fall. Is the third time going to be the one where this actually goes and works?
To me, it is legitimate effort.
Okay.
However, the whack-a-mole metaphor, I think, was pretty strong. I think what we're seeing here, though, is that these are going to be flagged. Mm-hmm. And the mechanism is a little bit awkward. You flag them, and then they go before a panel. The panel decides whether it's right or not. However, getting at what is fake news, again, what's the difference between opinion? Who is going to make these decisions? There's going to be a lot of people saying you're wrong here.
I do think that they've chosen to partner with, in this country, at least with organizations that I've heard of, PolitiFact and Snopes and the Associated
Pointer,
Press. They're trying their best to find people who can sort of dispassionately determine whether a story is false or not. I don't know the German nonprofit that they're signing up with there, but I agree. I have to agree with you, John. I don't know. It is like a whack-a-mole, and I don't know that you can ever keep this content from being disseminated. After all, it takes a little while for whatever this process is to vet that content, and in the meantime, people are sharing it. So you can't put that genie back in the bottle.
But one thing I thought that was really smart about this is that Facebook is trying to follow the money. Mm-hmm. So trying to...
Shocker.
Yeah, exactly. Well, basically trying to be able to say, okay, we can identify these things and then label them, and so they're not being paid for the associations with what they get.
Well, and talking about money, I mean, I do applaud Facebook for belatedly, perhaps, going after this fake news problem. But in Germany, the reason they might be doing it, in addition to the fact that they've got elections coming up there, is that in Germany and in the rest of Europe, lawmakers are much more inclined to pass laws that punish the media or to
500,000 euros, a fine.
So they might have been inclined to act more quickly because of that, too.
Okay, well, I want to talk to you guys about this weekend, and I want to talk to you about the ice storm that wasn't. I was out of town, so most of the coverage that I saw was as a result of what was posted on social media, what was posted on our local news outlets' websites, having to watch from afar. You both lived the storm.
Mm-hmm. I lived the first storm, which is why I may have
the
a little
December
bit...
16th storm?
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
In fact, I was on my way to the airport in St. Louis, and it took me 10 hours to get from here to St. Louis, sliding along, watching all of these crashes along the side of the road. By the time I got to St. Louis at midnight, I was a wreck. It was nightmarish. So I had a little bit sympathy for the over coverage of what was happening here. I mean, I was in New York. I was judging the National Magazine Awards. I was following this ice storm, getting alerts from American Airlines saying you can change your reservations for free. So I did, in fact, and got in early, and then nothing. Absolutely nothing. And I'm still watching all of these reporters watching the rain or watching nothing on TV. It was
a full disclosure. I was intending and had a long planned family trip to Kansas City last weekend that had to be nuked because of all the predictions about the ice apocalypse or whatever. And so I'm trying really hard not to make my comments, reflective of my own personal situation. Here's what I think I'd say about it, though. Did the television news operations that make their money on weather and their reputation for weather go overboard? Absolutely. They certainly did. They have lots of toys and lots of people that they invest money in, and they want to get a return on that investment. So they did it. Will they be criticized more for being over the top or for not giving enough information to people who need it, and then somebody gets hurt or whatever? They're obviously going to always side with let's do more rather than less. But here's the problem for me. As much as we may trot out all of this weather radar, we show all these little lines, and within 5 minutes the weather will be here, and then in 10 minutes it'll be there. We can't actually predict the weather that accurately. We pretend like we can do it more than we can do.
Which is exactly what happened on December 16th. Nobody forecasted this thing, which is why there was no salt trucks. I saw none, literally no trucks on the whole 10-hour drive.
In last month.
Last month.
Well,
right.
and interestingly enough, I was driving back on Sunday and driving through Illinois and then in Missouri, and I can tell you I didn't see a single truck from Bloomington, Illinois, straight to the state line. Yet from the state line at Missouri until I reached Columbia, I think there were 5 or 6 trucks along I-70.
Salting dry roads.
Exactly, salting dry roads.
And I guess we should also say that to our audience, especially the KBIA audience, where the station reaches down to the Lake of the Ozarks, there
and
were
up
people
to
who
Kirksville.
were,
There were people who were affected affected seriously. Mike, you had touched though about the idea of television stations and making their reputation on weather. Does this create a Chicken Little or a Boy Who Cried Wolf situation, though? Or is there enough of a memory from that December 16th, like John is talking about, where you're going to write off that maybe they missed this one in such a way?
Every time there's been a big weather situation like this or a predicted one, we've talked about it on this show, and if maybe this was the first or second time that happened, I might have predicted, yeah, you could cry wolf, you could do this too many times, but I don't see it affecting it. The audience still tunes in, they still want to see all the gadgets, they still want to see their weather people, they still want to participate in this sort of communal, oh, it's terrible, it could really be disaster.
We're all going to go buy up the last dozen eggs.
But the scary part was these kids being not getting home until 10, 11 o'clock at night, parents fearful. Where is the kid? You can imagine this fear from a parent if your 7-year-old kid is in a car someplace.
Well past my bedtime.
Exactly.
I want you to take a listen to this because these tones can only mean one thing.
Today, January 14th, 1952. 7 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. We are in NBC's World Communications Center in the heart of Radio City, New York. We are in touch with the world. We'll tell you what's happening today.
There you have it, January 14th, 1952. The Today Show debuted, and with it, the birth of morning television news. The idea of leaving the house with an idea of what to expect from the day, that's kind of been the legacy that's been created here.
I loved watching these programs, this history, because you do see the history. I think that all the coverage recent on the 65th anniversary, you were seeing this. I am not a morning television watcher.
Okay.
I'm not. I can't be distracted. I have to go. I have to kind of get up. I have to make the coffee. I got to eat something. Then I got to get out the door. So I'm a radio listener.
Okay.
And the visuals distract me. But I began to think, wow, I've missed a lot here in the mornings.
Well, and frankly, as some of the articles on our Links blog point out, that was the entire concept behind the Today Show in the beginning, is to make it like morning radio. The visuals weren't nearly as important as the conversation, because you might be dipping in and out of watching TV to do your morning routine. And a whole lot of other things that we see now as just routine on television. 65 years ago, they were doing it. The focus on personalities, and having a team of people talking about they're doing, a focus on entertainment as well as news.
And Dave Garroway, the tone that he brings to this is so similar to what we're seeing now. I thought it was really fun to watch that, actually.
And that idea of having a sense of what you're going into for the day, I will never forget. I had a news director who told me she didn't care what I put my morning reporter on, because all anybody really wanted was the window to outside and to see how that morning reporter was dressed, what the weather looked like, if they were holding an umbrella, if they had on a heavy coat. It was just that opportunity to know how to start your day as you were going.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
I've walked by that window,
Yeah.
In New York, and it is an alluring window.
Yeah.
You kind of, and the crowd that is captured there almost every single day. It's mesmerizing, really.
And I think it's indicative of where morning television and the Today Show is going now, because news is just less and less a part, serious news, of what they do, or at least how they make their money, because people get their weather and their sports and their news headlines from their mobile phones, basically in the morning. So now it's all about the entertainment, adding those extra hours, adding all the celebrities, adding the concerts in the park and all that kind of stuff is a direct response to how people get their news today.
Okay. Well, before we go, something I want to bring up quickly that I was hoping to talk about last week. It was a post that showed up on Facebook from WINK TV in South Florida. It publicly called out a guy who photobombed a reporter live on the air, shouting expletives into her microphone. And the post asked if anyone knows the guy and said that his act was beyond heckling. It was disgusting and degrading to all women, and that the station wouldn't stand for anyone doing that to either their employees or to women as a whole. And I have to wonder, though, does this actually help defend your product and your staff, or does it actually sink to this guy's level by creating open season on him?
I don't know, you go, Mike.
I'm actually okay with calling out that kind of behavior because we see more and more raunchy behavior in front of live shots all the time. I don't know more about this story than what you basically shared with us.
Yeah.
It sounded like he made a sexually explicit taunt of the reporter. But I will say this much. If we're going to be going out there and calling out people, we also have to think about what we do to predicate those kind of conditions.
I mean, I could tell you what he said, but KBIA would lose its license.
But I mean, look at what CNN did or Fox News did on New Year's Eve. They were encouraging drunken behavior. So I don't know what Wink TV was doing locally, but we've got to be careful about our responsibility too.
But at the same time, when the station kind of makes this alert, and this guy was obviously drunk, and so if that station is responsible, all these other people could be after this guy, and is that legitimate? Is that right for a station to call it out?
And that's part, I think, that scares me a little bit, is you create this vigilante behavior, potentially.
That scared me a bit.
Yeah, okay. Well, that music means we are pretty much out of time for this week. I'd like to thank you for spending the last half hour with us. You can read more about the topics we talked about on today's program. You can see that on the links blog under the programs tab at kbia.org. Like us on Facebook or follow us on Twitter. Our handle is @ViewsOnKBIA. These are all great ways to watch and listen to our program again, to leave us comments or questions, see previews of what we'll be talking about next week, and more. Our thanks to RJI's Travis McMillan for directing today's show and to Kyle Felling for handling the audio. I'm Amy Simons. Be sure to join us again next week when we're back with you for another edition of Views of the News.